Well, again, like I said already, that we can't address the issue of climate change in a kind of piecemeal fashion. I was quite interested in, I'm actually quite sympathetic to Judith's position. You outlined at the start that we have to take certain sorts of measures on the environment. But again, you were saying we can only solve this within the EU, as if the EU sort of represents the whole of the globe. And I do think that is a problem, actually, that you have to look at these issues in the round as global issues, and certainly not just as UK wide issues or as EU issues, but as global issues. And we have a situation where all of these countries we have in the world are all trying to outgrow each other, outcompete each other, outproduce one another. This is a nightmare situation, and this is why we cannot get any proper binding agreements on things like carbon emissions and so on. So that's a big problem. And then the other thing that people always forget about is that we've got organisations and bodies and states that are polluting the environment in ways that most people never even are aware of. For example, the US military is one of the biggest polluters. I think by some reckonings it is the biggest polluter in the world. Okay, so you can have all of the kind of green taxes, all the kind of legislation on carbon emissions that you can throw at this problem. But while you still have a system of capitalism, which necessitates war, and all of the military apparatus that goes with that, in the case of the American military, it's huge, then you are not really addressing the problem in a serious way.
Okay, thank you. Judith. What would you do to radically reduce the effects of climate change as an MEP?
I would work with the rest of the Liberals across the Union to continue pressing for much tougher EU commitments to curb climate change and to curb carbon emissions. We have form in this, so I'm not just saying it to keep you happy because it's the policy that's in the air at the moment. It is something that as Liberal Democrats we passionately believe in. We have led in the past, when we had more than just one MEP, we led the charge on trying to curb climate change. We don't just put a date on it. We don't say zero carbon emissions by 2020, 2025, whatever. We come up with practical ways that people will accept and will act by. And we're a very pragmatic party. We want to come up with policies that will work. We have ideals, of course, free, fair and open society. It matters massively. But we also want to come up with practical policies that change things. Just again, to give you our form, when we were in government, in the coalition, we doubled investment in renewable energies, and we increased the proportion of energy that was generated by renewables to 15%. It's not massive, we could do a lot better than that, but the Tories have let it drift back to 11%. Now the reason I know that the Tories have let it drift back to 11%, and that's a today figure, is because of the wonderful news that today the UK did not use any coal-powered energy for the first time since the 1800s. And this is totally party political. If anything, I think the Greens deserve credit for actually starting and getting the steamroller going behind environmental policy. But after us, we were the greenest government you've ever had, and if you get Lib Dem MEPs, we'll be the greenest MEPs you've ever had.
Okay, thank you. UKIP had three candidates, had three members of Parliament for this region. What have you done as a party to represent and to help support the move towards climate change?
Well, climate change is a very interesting thing. Obviously, it's very much in the news recently with the Extinction Rebellion event in London. It was quite a good event, actually, to be fair. I was in London at the time and made walking around Westminster an awful lot easier. I've come to the conclusion they need to pedestrianise all of that and make life a lot easier.
Official policy?
I don't think that's actually official party policy, to be fair. It was just my observation while I was there. But actually, UKIP are not anti environmentalism. We support it quite a lot, and our energy policy does quite a lot. I've supported. I was about to come to those. I worked quite while I was on the Isle of Wight Council. I did quite a lot to try to put forward microgeneration on the Isle of Wight Council, because that's something that I personally support. But it's interesting to look, and I agree that this is something that is actually a global problem, because in global terms, the UK produces about 1% of man-made carbon dioxide. So the other 99% is coming from somewhere else. Well, we could stop producing it overnight, and that's still not going to be anywhere near enough, is it? If you believe the worst case scenarios. So we can't do it on our own. The numbers say we can't do it on our own. But the EU isn't going to sort it on its own, because that's only one part of the problem. It is a global problem. And for politicians, this is an issue, because all the actions that you want to take on tackling climate change are always going to have a lot of negative local impacts, or people are going to perceive that they are. So you're going to be doing something that damages yourself in order to try and do something better for the planet. But people try to get elected. So this is the nub of the problem, and why nothing's happened yet.
We're going to go to Labour now, just on this point about the EU and ways, if you were an MEP, you could help to reduce climate change.
So I think the point that everyone has made is that this is not something that we can work on our own. So as part of the Labour Party, we are going to continue to work with the Socialists and Democrats Alliance to make sure that we put climate improving air quality at the very centre of our policy making. Actually, Labour MEPs are already doing a lot of things. So there are new EU targets about net zero emissions by 2050. And a 32% renewable energy target by 2030. And these are things that the Socialists and Democrats have already been pushing in the EU. But we also need to make other things. We need to make sure that there is enhanced market surveillance when it comes to things like emissions. We need to make sure there's more transparency. And one of the things that our sister parties have now put forward in the EU is to make sure that fines go as much high as £26,000. So if people are not doing the right thing, we need to make sure that people also fine. I also want to quickly say that just before I came, maybe a month ago, I'm also a councillor, and we have and I represent a very deprived borough in London, and we have just declared climate emergency over there. And to make that, what we have done is we are making sure that people are now paying more for parking. We have to, and the reason why we have so many people using cars is because the public transport system is absolutely rubbish. And it's because public transport is not being well funded. And these are things that only Labour is going to make sure that they work towards.
Rohit, in terms of going into these the negotiations with the Tories at the moment to discuss, is climate change on, or anything to do with environmental protections anywhere in near Labour's list of...
I wish I was that close to the leadership to know that. But jokes aside, the manifesto is going to be out tomorrow. As far as I understand, the negotiations are failing, and that is why we are having the manifesto launch tomorrow. And I think you will see what we have over there.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to go over to Robin, please.
Well, the Brexit Party obviously doesn't have a specific policy on climate change. How do you expect us to do? We've only been going through 4 weeks.
Do you have
please allow me to ask.
So do you have an opinion as a candidate if you don't have a party doesn't have a set of policies?
I represent a party, and until we have a collective opinion, I'm not going to give you my personal opinion. I can talk through the economics of a lot of issues, what this country has done. I will say one thing about our energy mix and what the government has done. We're now in a situation when I was involved, and I looked at a lot of privatisations back in the 90s for the regional electricity companies, Power Gen, National Power, and these companies at the time, obviously they were owned by the government, and also nuclear with British Energy. And at the time, British Energy was producing about 25% of our energy needs. Now, nuclear has steadily declined now. We've done and it's obviously green in the sense that it has no carbon emissions. However, The issue with nuclear has always been, obviously, taking away its waste. Now, this country, as you know, signed an appalling deal with the Chinese. The French built Hinkley Point, and the Chinese funded it at a rate of 8.5% real return on capital, when our cost of capital in this country with the long bond is about 3%. So it was a giveaway to the Chinese. Now, I regard that as an exercise in economic idiocy. And the point as well is that we now subsidize all forms of renewable, and people like us probably can afford that bill, but for the 350 extra supplement, it is a regressive tax on people's living. And so we need to discuss, so we now also as a country subsidize all forms of power, wind, solar, combined cycle gas, and obviously you mentioned coal has gone. So
It's not gone.
It's
been on hold for a week.
It's been on hold. But the point being is that we're now subsidising all forms of power in this country, when in fact we had a perfectly reasonable system of very clean combined cycle gas turbines, and one.
Okay, we're going to go over to Vix now. Kind of sort of what Darryl was saying about that we are too small, and even Europe is too small to make a difference with climate change. Do you agree with that?
No.
So what would you do?
Judith was talking about how dates aren't important. I think dates are incredibly important. In the European elections in 1989, the Green Party made a breakthrough. We got 15% of the vote. And we got absolutely no representation because it was not a proportional system there. If we'd been able to take action on a national and an international basis then, we would not be in the mess that we're in now. We would not have only 12 years left. We would have taken the action that was needed then, and we didn't. It's very important. Time is of the essence, and dates are important, and things don't happen unless we set targets for that. And regarding the people claiming, or parties claiming how green they are, Climate Action Network, CAN, have produced a report looking at what every European grouping in the European Parliament, and they've scored them, out of a percentage as how well they score on that, and you can find that out for yourself. I think is it the EPP and the ED? There are a number of groups that only get about 10%. I think the Labour group get about 60%. I think similar to the, a bit more than that, the ALD. It's the Greens that are in like the 80s and 90s%. We need to take radical action. We need to follow the money, frankly, linking into what you were saying. And the money, the investment, the subsidies for fossil fuels in the UK is £10 billion a year alone, never mind across the whole of Europe. And therefore we need to enact legislation. And it's very clear, this is from a personal basis, it's very clear that politicians and business owners and the wealthy and some people who are in the media are very scared about this, because it may not have escaped your notice, but I think I'm the only person here on the panel that's had Guido Fawkes writing lies about me on social media and on blogs, because they feel threatened. Because if you want green and you want radical actions and you want to take back control away from the wealthy and the big corporations and the fossil fuel investment, you must vote green. It's the only way we're going to make that big change.
A weekend with Al Gore about 15 years ago where he was the guest speaker, and he at the time was setting up a renewable fund in which he was the chief executive and busy going around the city trying to raise money for it. Now, talk about enrichment. He also predicted at that time that we had 10 years in which to save the planet in a similar cataclysmic forecast. And all I know is in that 10 years, the world still goes round, the temperature still oscillates, but Al Gore is now worth about $500 million.
53% of wild mammals have been lost. 50% of plant life has been lost. We are not in a good situation.